Hello everyone, thank you very much for asking me to take your worship once again. And this time we're going to be thinking about what happened on the first Easter day, the first Easter Sunday. Now, I know that you've been learning all about the events that led up to Easter. You've been reading and learning about how Jesus entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday when everyone was shouting Hosanna, laying palm branches, and you can see the cloaks before him. And you've been learning about how Jesus had his Last Supper on the Thursday evening with his friends. There's a picture of Jesus, his disciples, and you can see Judas going out of the door there. And you've been learning about, the Good Friday story of the crucifixion. How Jesus was crucified on the Friday, died at 3 o'clock, and was then taken from the scene of the crucifixion, a place called Golgotha, to a tomb, which was basically a big hole in rock, a cave by any other name, given by someone who admired Jesus. And a huge stone, a huge boulder was put over the face of the cave to seal that tomb. That was on the Friday. The story doesn't end there. And this is the story now of Easter. They couldn't do anything on the Saturday because that was the Sabbath. And on the Sunday morning, some women who had been part of Jesus's group of followers wanted to do for Jesus's body what would normally have been done for any Jewish person that had died at the time. But they couldn't do because the Sabbath began when Jesus died, which was to put flowers on the body and to what's called anoint the body with oil and perfume and prepare it properly for its burial. So early on the Sunday morning, this is the first Easter Sunday, they thought Jesus had died on the Friday before, and they were on the way, this group of women, one of them called Mary Magdalene, and they was on the way to the tomb where Jesus' body was laid. There's only one problem. They wondered how they were going to roll this massive stone, this massive boulder that had been put over the face of the cave away. How were they going to roll the stone away? Well, they needn't have worried, because when they got to the cave, when they got to the tomb where Jesus' body had been laid, they saw that the stone had already been rolled away. Now, the natural assumption, and which is what occurred to them straight away, is they thought someone had stolen Jesus' body for whatever reason. We don't know, but there were plenty of people who were against Jesus that might have wanted it just completely disappeared, and certainly wouldn't have wanted his tomb to be a place where people would visit. And so they went to the mouth of the cave and they looked inside. And at first it was just dark and they couldn't see anything, but gradually, as their eyes became accustomed to the light, they saw two figures sitting on the stone where Jesus' body had been put. And these two figures are described in the Gospels as being two angels. And this is what the angels said to Mary Magdalene and the other women. Why are you looking for Jesus here? Don't look for people who are alive amongst places that you would put people who are dead. Why are you looking for the living in the part of the dead? Jesus isn't here. He's been risen from death. And he's gone before you back to Galilee, where he came from originally. And he wants you to go and tell the disciples, tell Peter and all the other disciples, this good news about Jesus is being raised from the dead, what we call the resurrection, and to follow him to Galilee. Well, the women didn't know what to think. They were terrified. And they thought they'd better go back and tell the disciples. So they went and they told Peter, and they told all the disciples what had happened. And Peter and another disciple, who isn't actually named in the Gospels, but people think is John, went back with the women to the cave. And Peter and John ran, and John went into the cave and saw that all the things that had been wrapped around Jesus' body were actually laid in a nice, neat, folded, tidy pile on the place, the big kind of slab of stone where his body had been put. And the tomb was empty. Now that's That's the key. That's the most important point of the Easter story. The tomb where Jesus' dead body had been put was empty, and Jesus was not there in that tomb anymore. He'd gone back into the place where living people are, the land, you might say, of the living. Jesus wasn't there, so Peter and John went back to tell all the other disciples. But Mary, who was very close to Jesus, stayed at the empty tomb, and she did what any normal human being, I think, would have done in those circumstances. She started to cry. And as soon as she was weeping her tears and her eyes were all bleary, she saw a figure in front of her, and she thought it was the gardener. And she went to this figure who was just standing still, looking at her, watching her. Thinking it was the gardener, she went to him and said, "Sir, if you've taken his body away, please tell me where it is so that I can properly prepare it." And this figure looked at Mary and just said one word, her name, Mary. And in that saying of her name, she heard the voice she knew belonged to Jesus. And she realised that it wasn't the gardener, it was Jesus himself standing there. And she tried to grab onto him, she tried to hold him. And he said, "Don't touch me at the moment, but I want you to go and tell all the disciples that you've seen me and to go back to Galilee. And I will be there, and as I'm there in Galilee, I will meet you and I'll be with you again." And so that's what Mary did. She went back and she told the disciples what had happened. Now, there's lots and lots in that story to think about. That Mary wanted to hang on to the kind of physical body of Jesus, but what had happened was bigger than just a human being there physically. The tomb, the place of death where Jesus' body was empty. Jesus wasn't there anymore. And the stone which had sealed that cave had been rolled away, almost like death itself had been rolled away. And that's incidentally why we have Easter eggs today, because in lots of places there are Easter egg rolling competitions, and that's remembering the stone being rolled away. And of course, an egg, when it's hatched, brings new life, doesn't it? It could be a chicken, it doesn't even be a chicken, it could be a goose, it could be any kind of bird, but that egg is a symbol of new life. And that's again why I hope you enjoy your Easter eggs on Easter Sunday morning, because I know I'll be enjoying mine, thinking about the new life that brings. Now, that's the story of Easter, and there's also lots of other stories after that about how Jesus appears to his disciples. Maybe I'll get to tell you some of those stories at another time. There's one where he appears to two friends walking along. There's one where he appears to one of the disciples that missed his appearances, Thomas, and he invites him at that point to actually feel the wounds in his hand. And there's another story about him meeting the disciples that had gone back to being fishermen and helping them catch a massive amount of fish and eating the breakfast with them. But I can go into those details another time. What I want to finish on and talk about today is what that story of Easter means. What does it mean to say that something which was dead and appeared to be a complete disaster, that everything that could go wrong had gone wrong, was actually the story of being transformed into new life? So I want to tell you the story which helps us to understand this, of the three trees. Now, the story of the three trees is this. There were once three trees which stood on a hill, just like those three crosses stood on a hill. But those three trees didn't want to just remain trees. They wanted to do brilliant, marvellous, great big famous things. So the first tree wanted to be made into a magnificent treasure chest to contain the richest and most precious things in the world. And the second tree wanted to be made into a magnificent sailing ship that would take people on adventures and take important people wherever they wanted to go to. And the third tree wanted to be made into a spire of a great cathedral, pointing up into the sky, reminding people of heaven and reminding people of God. And that's what those 3 trees wanted. But one day, a woodcutter came with his axe and he chopped all 3 trees down. And the first tree, instead of being made into a magnificent treasure chest, was made into a feeding trough for animals. And the second tree, instead of being made into a magnificent galleon and ocean-going boat, was made into a simple fishing boat, like a rowing boat that you put on a lake. The third tree wasn't even made into anything at all. It was just chopped up into planks of wood, which were leant against the wall of a carpenter's workshop. But one day, the time came when that feeding trough, which was that the first tree had been made into, had a baby put in it by someone called Mary. And that someone, that baby, was Jesus. And so that piece of wood realised that it did, after all, get to contain the most special, the most precious, the richest gift that's ever been given in the world, Jesus himself. And the second tree, years later, was taken out onto the Sea of Galilee, and someone stood in it, teaching the crowds on the side. And again, that someone was Jesus. And so the tree realised that it had been made into the most precious, special boat of all, because it was the boat that contained Jesus. What do you think happened to the third tree? Well, a few years later, those planks of wood were nailed together in a cross shape. And that same person that stood in the boat was nailed to that cross on Good Friday, because it was made into the cross that Jesus himself was crucified on. And the tree realised that at that point, it was pointing towards God and how God cares so much for the world that he gave his only son, that it was the clearest pointing to God in heaven, clearer than even the most magnificent spire of any cathedral. Now, those 3 trees all wanted something, and they were chopped down, and they thought it was a complete disaster, and that there was everything they'd wanted to be was lost, because they didn't get what they imagined was going to happen. But actually what happened, the trough was the manger of Jesus, the boat was the boat Jesus used, and the planks were the cross, were better and clearer and richer than anything they could have even desired or imagined. And I think that's a bit about how we can understand the resurrection, that it gives us the chance to transform our lives, because Jesus has shown us just how strong God's love is for us. And of course, that's just a fairy story, because trees don't think for themselves and I want to be this, that and the other. It's just a story to show how things which on the first sight appear to be a complete disaster, like Jesus' crucifixion, actually, when you think about it more deeply and carefully, can be signs of something deeper and stronger and richer, because it shows us God. So the resurrection is the most important part of the Christian beliefs, and Easter Sunday is the most important day in the Christian calendar, because it shows us God's strength, God's power, and ultimately just how strong God's love for each one of us is. Well, thank you very much for letting me tell you the Easter story and something about what it means. Really enjoy taking your worship. I hope you enjoy your Easter Sunday. I hope you enjoy those Easter eggs and anything else you might have to do with Easter. And you might want to think about having an egg rolling competition yourselves. Just get a hard-boiled egg and decorate it. Get something that's on a slope and see whose egg can roll the furthest. And if you do that, you'll be taking part in something that Christians have been doing for literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So thank you very much for asking me to share this Easter worship, and I wish you all a very happy Easter.